So hello, yes, as Scott said, my name is Ashley Tutera. I'm a senior business analyst with Gideon Taylor, and I'm going to be walking you through it. I do want to do a quick apology. You can't tell because I'm not so close, but I'm nursing a cold. So if I pop off of my video, just know I'm just tending to it so we can soldier on, but I apologize in advance. So yes, as Scott said, the solution, I'm condensing it down just for this mini session. But the quick background was it was 2 forms to create this process. So the first thing was for St. Paul Public Schools, their employees were traveling a lot, whether that was going in between campus if they worked off for multiple schools, or if they needed to report mileage because they were coming back onto campus or any facility from coming home where they had to get called into parent meetings, things of that nature. So the first form that I'm not going to be showing here was a mileage profile. For those employees that consistently had to report mileage every month, they could at least set up a profile that could set up some defaults. Then the biggest form, which again, there's more to the form, but I'm going to highlight the fantastic financial area of it, was this mileage grid. So every month, how did they report their starting location and where they ended up? And usually if they got to a facility, they wanted to be paid to go back home. So usually at least that report had 2 mileage to and from options. So we really delved into this, and that's what I'm going to be showing you at a high level. However, there is a full recording out on our YouTube page of both of the solutions in a more laid out format than the condensed version I will be taking you through today. So what is the mileage grid? What were the main features of it? So we asked what date they drove. We have this copy row feature that I'll actually show in a video. We always ask them for their from address, and we did have some integration where we were able to create a custom modal pop-up window so they could have a little bit more flexibility on figuring out what address they were at, or even creating their own custom address, and then we would just pull in the name of that location back on the form. Same process for a to location. The coolest part of this form is our Google Maps integration. So you'll see that in a minute of how somebody could view a map to see what the possible routes they could have taken. And then once we finish filling out the grid, I will show you guys how we actually use Google Miles to calculate the distance. Because not everybody drives the most fast route to some place. You'll be able to see how they could view the map, see, oh, this is actually the route that I took, here's the distance it was, and they could go and update their mileage profile. And we won't show a lot of it, but there was a purpose for all of those options. So what are kind of the features of this grid? So first thing with date-driven, we do have a lot more logic, but kind of the quick highlights were we made sure that they couldn't be more than 60 days in the past. That had some tax reimbursement implications, so we did put a hard stop that you couldn't be reimbursed. If it took you more than 2 months to put in your reimbursement, you still had to go through a manual process, so we didn't have to worry and see what taxation came into play. And we also always make sure we weren't future dating. We didn't want to have people constantly having to update and say, oh, I thought I was going to travel to all those places. I ended up not. So we also wanted to limit that. So there wasn't as much on the evaluator. We really wanted the evaluation process very quick. They could trust the information, and it was relevant information that was no more than about 30 days old, and then move forward. Next, those from and to locations, again, they both have pretty similar logic. The one piece, though, that differs is the default for from. That was based on the mileage profile. So that way, at least every single time someone started a form, if there was a consistent from location, that was one less click these end users had to enter, so we would default in the from. And then if they were adding additional rows, whether they manually added it or they used that copy from feature, well, actually copy from slightly different. So if they manually added a row, if they added that row, whatever the to location was on the previous line, we then carried down to the from location. So again, really trying to help minimize the amount of clicks for those employees that had lots and lots of rows every single month. So how would they enter where those locations? We did create a custom setup table so that way our business users could control if there were new locations added, if perhaps addresses changed, or more commonly, if there were some tweaks into the location name, somebody didn't have to rely on a developer to go make those tweaks. Our business partners were able to do that. So they were able to say what the location code was, what the location name was, and then the address features. We also knew that sometimes home was a very consistent option. So we do allow people to enter a custom location. And again, we'll see some logic. We don't allow them to have that location that is actually a public school location. So it had to be a custom and unique one. But we at least had that option, and then that could be copied down to multiple rows so they don't enter it over and over again. And then finally, this is what I said before, those new rows, they defaulted back in. And then the view maps link, it would look to see what the actual address was on the from location and the to location, and would open to Google Maps, pass through those two locations, and then would just show you what those, again, if there were multiple routes, it would show you what those look like. So let's take a look and see how that is. So first off, I'm going to put in that date driven. And here again, we did this back in 2020. So right now I did way in the past of that 60 days and show that trigger. And then I'm actually going to end up entering in a future date, and you'll see that triggered a little bit later on through this demo. Filling out the purpose just to get that off. So we just had a list of purposes. There is another option you'll see in a minute here. And again, we can add in as many rows as we want. If we tried to submit, we would get yelled at for that future date. So just so you can see how that triggered. So we did allow people to try to fill out as much as possible because there was a save option. So at least maybe they could pre-fill it out. They just couldn't submit until after the month had closed. So here's that from feature. So they could do a prompt and see all of the public school locations that were already on file. And they could select which location they were at, and it would show them what the address was so they can have a second verification that that is where they went. And again, that transportation services had defaulted in. So now when they click view maps, ta-da-da, shows them all the different routes, and we always picked the fastest route. So the 3.7 miles is what you'll see in a little bit that we calculated. So here I'm just going to get this to be whatever the to date was at the time and put that in. And then show you how these extra rows. So again, I can manually add in another row, and you'll see Brittany's place moved down to my from location. So we're trying to keep that synchronous of kind of following their driving pattern. Again, I can select another option from the list as my location. And then I can show you putting in manually a to. So just because I carried it, if that happened to not be where they were, they always still could change it. But again, just trying to default to make it as seamless as possible for the folks that are following that consistent driving pattern. And here I can show you, even if you saw that that wasn't correct, you could still override a location, but at least pulled it in. Again, if you tried to name it the exact same, it would trigger an error for you. You had to create something custom. So here we'll just throw in test so you can see. And again, if you did view maps, it would show you. But let's say I needed to go back and forth. So I can just copy that row, and it copies everything down in line for me. The only one thing is the date driven. That always will show the same date. So if I had said 8/20 to 8/21, it would copy down for that date driven of 8/21. Here I'm showing you if you kept doing custom addresses, you couldn't put test again. You'd still have to then create another new name for another new custom address. So trying to help people as much as possible. So here I'm just going to show you, if I add those new rows, how we tried to keep those dates in sync as well. So people really, especially on the evaluator side, they always wanted to sort in date order. So we're always trying to make sure the greatest date was popping forward. Even if you copied down 8/20, it wasn't going to have 8/21s and then an 8/20 date back again for you. For the purpose, business needed an other option in case they didn't capture everything. So just showing you a quick view of that. And I'm just going to do a couple more rows here, just so you can see how it copies everything down. And again, keeps those dates in sync. And there we have it. So always copying those down. Any questions on this? It's again, just really showing you more dates here, but that is the essence of at least filling out the grid. Any questions on that? I'll check the chat.
I will comment that it's a really good example of rethinking what a form can be. It really is a custom self-service application that you built with the GT eForms tool. There's a lot of this stuff that is on the surface configuration based in terms of building out these pages with grids and stuff like that, but then there's a whole lot of tech that is incorporated behind the scenes that GT eForms supports. There are well over 100 different people code hooks built into the GT eForms framework to make these kinds of functions accessible and supportable and repeatable. So food for thought.
Yes, thank you, Scott. All right, and I didn't see any questions, so I will move on to the greatest meat. So essentially here we have our mileage filled out for the month. But as you can see, again, everything's still editable, and I actually don't have those Google Miles calculated yet. So now we actually want to calculate what the mileage was. So if I go through, so what we're going to see is, you saw it a little bit at the end there, we do have that calculate Google Distances button, and what that's actually going to do is going to read each row and do exactly what you did with that view map. So it's going to see the from and to locations and find the fastest or the shortest distance, I should say, between those 2 points and put it on the grid for us. There's also a section right above the calculate distances where you'll see the total amount. So we also do the math for those end users that are going to be approving these forms so they don't have to calculate each row. And again, it's more fun to just see it. So if we go ahead and play. So we calculate, it does ask if you're ready. There was a small fee with Google to integrate, so we tried to limit it. So you'll see it spins for just a second, and in an incredibly short amount of time, everything becomes read-only. We don't want people making changes at this point, but they could view that map and say, hey, 3.7, that doesn't sound right. And they could look and see, ooh, actually, the 5.3, that's the route that I took. And we do allow them to come back in and edit it, but you can see those two different categories, the actual miles versus the Google miles, so that way approvers were at least able to see what those two distances were. And once they've calculated it, we weren't letting them calculate again. Again, there shouldn't be anything because we weren't allowing them to edit any rows. But again, you can see that total miles and total amount. So it was a very fun solution to work on. As Scott said, not the most functional forward. There was a lot of tech, obviously, to get the integration to work with Google, but really saved a lot of time, has a lot more validity for those approvers to look at it to see exactly what the distance should have been, and then for people to say what their distance was. Approvers also could see the view map to do any type of checking to say, it took you double the time Google estimated. Where did you stop along the way? So it was a really great solution and really streamlined these monthly reports that the staff at St. Paul had to do. So with that, I will turn it back over to Scott unless there's any questions for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. So yeah, feel free to post questions again in the chat, either the Zoom chat feature or the Pathable feature. We're happy to respond to those as they come in. I'm going to go ahead and grab control. There we go. And let me show you Chartfield maintenance. So this form is going to look very different than the mileage reporting reimbursement form that Ashley just shared. But it gives you another idea of what forms automation can look like using a tool like GT eForms. Being able to design a user experience and incorporate all of your business rules and business logic, edits, validations to make sure that those processes are efficient, they are easy to understand, and they're compliant. So at the end of the day, you've got accurate information, you've got compliant tasks and processes that people are following. This particular form, let's go ahead and get into this. This is one that University of South Carolina built, and this is their Chartfield maintenance form. It does a few different things. And on this particular demo, we're going to be doing establishing a new crosswalk. So we'll navigate to their finance eForms. We've got some, we had the nav collection over there on the right that you might have seen that had the ability to add or initiate a form, which is what we're doing right here. We could also go in and view a form that's already been submitted, and going through the workflow process, we can pull one back and edit it if necessary. And if we're an approver, we would have an evaluate option for eForms that might be in our queue. So we see that this form starts out really simple. Oh, hang on a quick sec. It just shows us one segment essentially. Sorry, I had to jump back. I was not using the right shortcut keys here. So we've got, we're going to select what form function we want this form to perform for us, and we see a file attachment segment, and then we've got our action buttons. One of the things that we try to incorporate when we're looking at how to automate a process as an eForm is let's only show the user that information that they need to see at the time. Let's not show them all kinds of extraneous parts of the form, segments that they may not have to worry about, fields that don't apply. Let's make sure that we're delivering a user experience that is easy to follow and efficient. So we'll go ahead and start creating a new crosswalk. We see another section open up in our form for Chartfield data. If we click on the button to create a new department, we see some additional segments open up down below. Same with new fund code If we click on that, all of a sudden our form dynamically changes. We're shown some other segments and other fields that need to gather additional information for that kind of task. And now we can go in and just start filling out the information. What you're seeing here on the screen, I think everything here is functionally configured. So being able to build a custom fluid page, custom fluid segments, you've got a number of different fields within each segment. You've got some data that might be pre-populating or defaulting at times. That is predominantly configuration-based. So there's a lot that a business analyst can do with designing and developing these forms without necessarily getting a developer involved, or until a developer needs to get involved, executing some kind of unique logic, creating a setup table. So we see as we change values, again, the form might change based on the rules that we've set up. And that's all conditional logic that's incorporated within the form. A lot of that is also configuration based. This is cool. So we're going to go ahead and enter some information about the new fund that we want to create. And I'm going to get to this field called fund type. And if I look down at the bottom of my form, it's going to dynamically change based on the fund type that I selected. If I back up there just a moment, my action buttons right now are, I think that's cancel, and then there's a save button underneath there and a submit button. When I change my fund type, the form's going to recognize that, oh, then I need to change my behavior. I need to gather some additional information from you. So now that it's a fund type E, this is actually a button that says next. And it's going to take us to another page that we didn't have access to before because the form didn't need it. This is for a fund type A. That's not part of our business process to gather this additional information. This only applies to fund type E. So now I'm going to take the user to an additional page. I've got all this information that I want to gather with regards to setting up this particular fund type. If I go back though and I change my fund type again to Z, it's going to execute differently. So now I go down and I click next. It's going to take me to a different page, not the one that was required for fund type E. This one is very specific to fund type Z. So it's following all of my business requirements in terms of gathering the appropriate information based on the values that I'm filling in on the form. And that kind of dynamic conditional behavior, again, is configuration based. So pretty cool. File attachments are fully supported, and then I can have those file attachments stored off either in PeopleSoft or OnBase or Perceptive Content, whatever file storage tool you might be using. I have to click this acknowledgement in order to submit my form. If I didn't, the form would be it would give me a hard stop, not allowing me to proceed until I actually acknowledge that. In this case, I needed to also add the description to the attachment that I uploaded. So it's making sure that it's catching any potential errors as we go along. Yeah. So just a couple of quick summary slides, and then if folks want to see the invoice e-form, we can definitely do that. I realized that some of the functionality that I was really excited about in the invoice e-form, Ashley actually showed, like the copy down features. That's pretty cool functionality that's very popular with a lot of our clients. So GTE forms overall, there are all kinds of really cool things that you can do with it in terms of extending automation within your system and allowing PeopleSoft to do far more than it does today and do it easier, faster, and better. So those screenshots that I'm showing right now are a bunch of examples of different e-forms that have been created for employee onboarding, for Chartfield maintenance, for questionnaires and surveys, a whole host of different actions. And many of these are the functional configuration tools or features that I mentioned before. Configuration-based form creation in terms of pages, segments, fields, being able to have a business analyst create those, having a business analyst create grids within your form. Pre-population and data defaulting, conditional form behavior is predominantly configuration-based, restricting valid values, bulk actions. That may not be configuration-based, but it is a really cool function that a lot of organizations do with e-forms to help accelerate tasks that need to be done. So you can do spreadsheet uploads to launch e-forms. You can take an entire spreadsheet and have it populate multiple rows on a single e-form, or each row on your spreadsheet could launch an individual eForm, and then it will go on its merry way, allow people to edit that information, approve that information, and then automatically update that information within PeopleSoft. So a lot of really powerful functionality there. Attachment management, obviously, configurable routing, full PeopleSoft security, so you can control who accesses these forms, how they access them, where they access them. Edits and validations, reporting and analytics. Since all of this is inside PeopleSoft, if you want to incorporate the data from your forms with Kibana, with simplified analytics, with pivot grids, those are all accessible functions with eForms. Over here to the right, just some great results that organizations have seen with eForms over the years, and a few quick client profiles. I'm not going to go through the details on these, but I do want to mention this last one. So Princeton has been using GT eForms for the last few years. When the pandemic started early last year, they needed to evacuate campuses and send students home. They realized that not all students could leave, so they developed 2 quick eForms that allowed for students to declare if they needed to shelter on campus, and then a secondary eForm that allowed them to notify the university when they were leaving after they sheltered. They identified the need for those eForms on a Thursday. They launched them in production the next day. So they created both of those forms in less than a 24-hour period. It was a matter of hours to create, test, and deploy those forms. And they've since gone on to develop a number of different eForms for COVID-related requirements, but then a whole host of different eForms for other actions across the enterprise. These are, we've already talked about many of these as we were going through the demos in terms of the different kinds of features that GT eForms has that enable mindful automation, being able to design efficient, effective processes with the user experience in mind, being able to auto-populate, being able to display conditional behavior, being able to route conditionally, easy access to the forms, either on delivered PeopleSoft portals or other portal solutions, being able to redefine what self-service looks like inside your PeopleSoft applications, whether we're talking about finance and supply chain, HCM, campus solutions. Love this picture. GT has a partnership with InFlight. I don't know how many of you are familiar with InFlight. InFlight has a very cool tool to enable you to fundamentally transform the user experience and how PeopleSoft presents itself to users. These are screenshots of eForms that were configured inside PeopleSoft leveraging the InFlight user experience tool. So again, you can fundamentally transform what that user experience is going to be for your users with a tool like InFlight. Just a quick plug there. So are there any questions in the queue? If people wanted to, I would be happy to stick around and show you the invoice eForm, but I also don't have to. I'm happy to take a cue from what people might comment on.
Right now, no messages in the Zoom chat. I forgot to get the other chat up to see.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it.
Okay,
But certainly
great.
if there are other questions, you guys can feel free to post those. We're happy to hang out for a few more minutes. We appreciate your attention and your interest in finding out more about GT eForms. There was a thought that I had when Ashley was doing her mileage reporting eForm. There are a lot of organizations that will use GT eForms to create their own custom self-service applications from scratch. Then there are some that will use GT eForms to simply deliver a different user experience on top of an existing PeopleSoft module or application. Expenses is a good example of that. We've got a client right now that has been using PeopleSoft Expenses for many years. They were looking to deliver a more simplified experience for their infrequent travelers, people that they might travel once or twice a year. They're not particularly familiar with how to use PeopleSoft Expenses. They may not need to use many of the features of PeopleSoft Expenses. So we're actually working with this particular client to design an expense simplification process that allows for these users to have a much more simplified user experience with the expenses module. So now they'll interact with that module through an eForm, essentially layered in front of the delivered expenses solution. And then their information, they'll only be shown the fields, the segments, the pages that they need to complete based on the travel that they just performed. And then that information, once it's submitted and approved, we'll just go ahead and populate the delivered components. So execute the rest of the transaction without modifying anything in delivered PeopleSoft behind the scenes. All right. Well, I don't want to belabor the point. You guys have been great. And Ashley, thank you very much for your help this afternoon. If anybody needs to reach us, you can find us in our virtual booth within the next, well, before the conference closes tomorrow afternoon. We're more than happy to answer any questions you have. There's actually a couple of links in there, a couple of buttons, one that allows you to talk now to any of our representatives that might be in the booth at the time. The other is a join us live, which allows you to connect via Zoom to, again, to inside our booth. You can connect with us visually and ask any questions you might have. We're more than happy to show you more examples of powerful eForms automation or brainstorm on ideas that you might have about introducing this kind of automation within your organization. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a great afternoon and a good time at RECONNECT.